Today, I will discuss the evolution of a broken system of state funding for K-12 education in Mississippi. Almost all of our state-level politicians say they support education. It's like a mantra. I support education. I support education. Over and over, I support education. Well, really, they must mean education in a very different way than I understand it, because their votes certainly do not reflect support for public education. Let's face it, how we spend our money reflects what we value. By almost every metric, the majority of our politicians do not support public education with their votes. Furthermore, they actually fight against adequately funding public education. As a group, they did all they could to kill Proposition 42, which would have significantly helped in the fight for just adequately funding education. In some cases, legislators who courageously supported Proposition 42 faced getting primaried by their own party in the subsequent election year. Mississippi teacher salaries are the lowest in the nation and losing ground to inflation at a faster rate than in any other state. It's an election year. Politicians haggled over a very modest increase for teachers. I'm thankful that they came up with a $1,500 raise, but we're still last. We fund what we value. Almost a third of teacher education graduates move out of state to teach. Believe me, salary does matter. Unbelievably, a teacher with one child in Lee County qualifies for some public assistance. We hear politicians speak about level funding for education. Few people really understand how that impacts students and families across our beautiful state. For clarity, we need to look at education in a historical perspective, beginning with 1982. Prior to then, the inequity of funding from school to school was so stark as to really be illegal, which is why 1982 means so much. In 1982, Governor William Winter and the legislature passed landmark legislation for Mississippi families, the Education Reform Act of 1982. Among other things, it established compulsory attendance for school-aged children, state-funded kindergarten, and created equity in state funding for all school districts based on a per-pupil funding formula. The formula worked like this. Instead of giving districts money to hire teachers, it provided teacher units and teacher assistant units based on student enrollment. For conceptual understanding, let us imagine that for every 20 students, one teacher unit was awarded to a school by the state. That was true for every school in the state. Here we have equity, 1 to 20 everywhere. If a school had 200 students, it'd get 10 teachers, 20 to 1 ratio. If there were 600 students, the school would get 30 teacher units, etc. Teacher assistants for elementary schools were awarded on a pro rata basis as well. It worked like this. After each district finished hiring its teachers and teacher assistants, the district submitted a report to the state listing each teacher, his or her degree, level of years experience. The state calculated those numbers against the pay scale governing all districts and set that exact amount of money needed to pay for each of the teachers in that school and district. That was equity statewide. The state did not fund coaches or most administrators. Local districts paid coaches' salaries, assistant principals, principal superintendents, and other central office administrators from taxes levied from their local taxpayers. Under the minimum program funding concept of 1982, to cut teachers, the state had to announce a reduction in teacher units allotted to each district. It was a very clear cut in teaching staff, visible to all, and it rarely happened. Under today's lump sum funding mechanism, the state has cut more than $2 billion during the last 10 years. The governor, lieutenant governor, and legislative leaders constantly cite too many administrators as a rationale for the cuts. But they were never funded by the state. They were always funded by the local taxpayers. By cutting dollars, they are cutting teacher units without having to say so, as teachers make up the lion's share of the personnel budget. It is politically safer for a legislator to cut teachers through underfunding than it is to actually cut teacher units. When the state underfunds education, it causes tremendous equity in funding our schools. Districts in areas with a strong tax base can make up some of the loss with local revenue. Poorer districts cannot, causing an almost impossible situation. Buses get older and older and less safe. Buildings leak and deteriorate. Modern infrastructure is less available to them. Today, some 15 school districts get more funding locally than from the state. Two examples in our area are Oxford and Tupelo, who have large tax bases. They get the majority of their money from their local residents and businesses. State funding makes up about 40% of their budgets. Public education is the most successful vehicle for economic and social mobility for our people. Education helps more people out of poverty than any other single source. Imagine that Mississippi had the best educational system in the country. What would the state be like? We fund what we value. This is Chuck Garrett. Thanks for listening on Hill Country Network.